I'm happy to welcome you to the Agile and Project Management course. Today we have the first session of the course, traditionally in an open format. The topic is called Agile and Who is the HR Product Owner? That's our topic for today. I'll say that I'm a big fan of Agile HR and a big fan of Agile in general. My first attempts and experiments were way back in 2013 or so, when I tried to implement these approaches in teams. And everywhere I worked, I tried to implement various approaches and understood how important it was. This is our course website with Agile at the end of the name. The course program consists of 6 sessions. Julia is a fan too. Yes, that's cool. So we're like-minded. Our course here has 6 sessions. We cover the main elements of the work, if we haven't met some of you. My name is Mike Pritula, and here's a list of companies I've worked for. Alpha Bank, Starlight Media, Wargaming, Preply, IDO, and now Academy. In my work, I rely on world-class practices. From an Agile perspective, I have a very interesting experience that you could even say is unique to some extent. When I was working at Wargaming, we needed to implement a product approach in the work of several employees. Together with the director of the corporate university, we found a company in Silicon Valley. It's called 280 Group, and we invited a top speaker from this company, a former product director of ADB, who conducted a 3-day comprehensive training on product management, which I also attended as a client. And there, of course, I learned everything in detail. Although at that time I already had some experience and understanding. But there I really got fired up and started practicing even more, began applying even more Agile practices. Let's have you tell us a little about yourselves too. Write your city, position, and company so we know who's watching us. Those watching on Facebook can write there too. And those watching on Zoom, please write as well, so that we can see what our geography looks like today. The geography and distribution of positions is also interesting. So Almaty Yulia HR Director, Nizhny Novgorod HR. Cool. Thanks to those who wrote. I suggest you keep writing. I'll move forward to not waste time, and we'll read out your responses as they come in. Those who are already in the course, diplomas await you in exchange for all completed homework assignments. So today you'll have your first homework assignment. Please complete it in order to receive your diploma. Here's the program for our session today. Today we're diving into the topic of HR, looking at what it is. We'll look at the basic principles so that from the second session, you can start applying them in your project work. So let's start with the general topic of Agile because HR has adopted Agile methodologies from the programming field, that is the software development field. The programming field has an Agile manifesto which was published several years ago, quite a while back, somewhere in the early 2000s, by the initiators of, let's say, this technology, which states the following. I'll read it out. We are continuously discovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And that's exactly why HR is starting to adopt Agile. Today we'll talk about different formats of HR working with Agile because HR can apply Agile methodologies in their work, developing their HR products. They can work in a company where Agile is implemented, and then HR needs to understand it to know how the company operates. HR can be the initiator of implementing Agile methodologies and techniques at the company-wide level. And HR can implement specific aspects of Agile in the business. Therefore, there are many roles where HR can apply their Agile knowledge and many benefits that the company can derive from it. For Agile, or more precisely HR Agile, enthusiasts have also developed their own manifesto. There's a link to the Agile manifesto at the bottom, org, the website where it's published. Because there's a community around Agile HR, a book like this is coming out in the fall. It's not available yet, but it'll be released in the fall by 2 authors I'll be talking about today. So what does it say, or what does it state? These are the principles that are established. Supporting people so they can work, grow, and be happy in their workplace. First principle. Second, encouraging people to welcome changes and adapt to them when necessary. Third, helping to create support networks of independent, self-organizing, and collaborative teams with broad authority. Fourth, develop and maintain the motivation and capabilities of individuals and teams, help them create the necessary environment, and trust them to do their job. And fifth, to promote and stimulate personal growth, utilize various strengths and talents of employees. That is, from the perspective of the HR Agile Manifesto, it does what companies have long wanted to do. It puts the employee first in the company. It introduces new principles of interaction, not the old ones, not the outdated rigid hierarchy, but what are called network teams. teams working within projects and products, people development, relying on people's talents. These are all the things that have long been reviewed, written about by HR, and implemented. Let's move on. Agile has its own principles that both companies and HR are starting to follow, which Agile HR doesn't provide. First, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer's needs through regular and early delivery of valuable software. For HR, we'll discuss today who the customer is, and HR develops not software, but HR policies, practices, and procedures. Next, changes in requirements are welcome even in late stages of development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. We'll talk a lot about how HR that applies Agile methodologies works closely with the customer in small sprints, constantly showing what they're developing. Next, a working product should be released as frequently as possible, from every couple of weeks to every couple of months. That is, if we're developing an onboarding program, we don't spend a year developing the entire big onboarding program. Instead, every 2 weeks we present a little bit, a newcomer's handbook, an onboarding checklist, a newcomer's package, first meeting standards, and so on. Then it's more like Agile HR. Next, throughout the project, developers and business representatives must work together daily. We'll talk about this today as well as the principle. Motivated professionals should work on the project. To get the work done, it's necessary to create the right conditions for them. We'll talk about this too. Sixth, face-to-face communication is the most practical and effective method of conveying information both to and within the team. Seventh, working product is the primary measure of progress. Eighth, investors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely, and this helps. Ninth, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. 10th, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. We'll talk about this today as well. 11th, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. And the 12th principle, the team should regularly reflect on how to become more effective, then tune and adjust its behavior accordingly. These Agile principles are what HR teams are starting to apply and use for themselves, and we'll go over how to use them today. Now let's summarize. So what is Agile? Agile is a framework within which it's possible to solve complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively developing products of the highest quality. HR work is about working in conditions of constant change, in an environment of ongoing transitions, multiple priorities, putting out fires, dealing with various issues that arise with people, and so on. And for modern HR teams working today, Agile HR is an approach that saves them from complete failure and the inability to implement anything. Because I very often hear from HR people that there's not enough time to implement anything. They want to implement grading, build an onboarding system and a motivation system, review and build a system for training and developing people, talent management, and so on. But there's never enough time because of constant vacancies, quarantines, someone quitting, some emergency, an audit, or something else, and it just doesn't work out. And these HR principles, the ones that modern HR teams are starting to adopt, or rather apply, are what give HR the opportunity to create something for the business in this whole whirlwind of life. In Agile, there are many methodologies and many directions. We'll be looking at Scrum as one of probably the most popular approaches. Accordingly, Scrum has specific roles that teams work by, artifacts or what you might call attributes, and its own processes. And today we are going to briefly review all of this and discuss how HR can apply it too. I see Sergey, probably Sergey's favorite topic. Here is a brief outline of how a Scrum team works. There is the product owner. That is the one who represents the interests of the business. There is the product backlog, which is a collection of all the ideas that need to be or want to be implemented within either the entire HR function or a specific area. There is sprint planning. This is planning for either a 1, 2, 3, or 4-week cycle, where the tasks that the team plans to accomplish are selected. Then there is the sprint itself, which lasts from 1 to 4 weeks. The team determines this themselves. Daily stand-ups are held, usually for about 15 minutes in the morning. There is a team that works on the tasks. Sometimes there is a Scrum Master, but in Agile HR, only a large organization can afford to have a dedicated Scrum Master. Usually the Scrum Master and Product Owner are the same person who is also, for example, the HR Director in addition to these roles. There is a demonstration of the final work of the finished product, and there is a retrospective. This is the basic framework by which Agile HR operates using the Scrum methodology. So the team roles are the Product Owner, the Development Team, and the Scrum Master. In HR, this is most often several HR employees and possibly employees from the business side. That is, it can often include financial specialists, marketers, and sometimes it is called a project team. The Product Owner, whom we will discuss in more detail towards the end of the session, is the one who represents the business. The development team are those who develop the product itself. In our case, in the case of Agile and HR, there will not be, all these elements copying the work of a development team. So the Scrum team and the development team will likely be one and the same. And the Scrum Master is usually the person who implements all the principles of Scrum, for example. In IT companies, there are even separate individuals, a coach, who does not participate in tasks or problem solving, but implements the methodology, conducts meetings, and helps the team. It is rare to have a separate Scrum Master in addition to this. Perhaps, I will repeat, in some very large companies where the company can afford to hire a Scrum Master in HR as well. It can happen. This is what we call the classic approach. Next, processes. A sprint is essentially a period of time in which the team works to deliver a result. Sprint planning is the process of choosing what we will do and what we will present at the end of the sprint. Daily Scrum is a daily meeting. A sprint review is an analysis of what was accomplished, and a retrospective is a discussion of what could be improved. What's the idea behind this? The idea is that HR, wanting to be valuable and useful to the business, thinks about what results they're creating for their company. For example, at the end of the month, what can I say I've done that's so useful that the business would say thank you? And that's the idea of Agile, working within sprints. It's an attempt to deliver something every month, or for some, every 2 weeks, or for others, to give the business some tangible result every week. In other words, not some piece of an abstract future result that still needs to be refined, because modern business doesn't value that kind of approach. So if you say, this month I've been writing an onboarding policy, but it's not quite finished yet, we still need to detail the newcomer package and the mentor's role. The business, where we have people that need to be onboarded, people are leaving. The Agile approach, on the other hand, allows you to choose within the month. Okay, we won't write or create the entire onboarding process. What can we do within a month that would make the business say, wow, thank you, that was helpful. Friends, how great is what we have now? That's the logic behind it. If it's not completely clear yet, don't worry, because firstly, this is the beginning of the lesson, and secondly, this is only the first lesson. We'll gradually break it all down, analyze it, and by the end of the course, everything will be crystal clear, because that's Agile. When I went to driving school, the instructor used to say, there's no one who can't learn to drive a car. It was always just a matter of time. I can say the same thing about Agile. There isn't a person who can't learn Agile. Next, let's talk about artifacts. Artifacts are the essential elements of the Agile framework. Here we should have a product backlog. This is a list of all the ideas in HR. If we're talking about it, we can apply it to all of HR or to specific areas depending on how the team is configured. If it's an HR team with a small staff, their backlog will have ideas for all of HR. If we have divisions like a recruiting team, a learning and development team, a total rewards team, an HRS team, and so on, then each team will have its own backlog, and it will be focused on one specific area. It's extremely important to write down all the ideas we want to implement in HR. The sprint backlog is a piece of the overall backlog that is selected for the sprint. This is what we deliver to the business within the sprint. The increment is what we managed to implement from what was planned. It's the value we brought to the business. Now let's talk about best practices. I'll tell you about a few technologies in Agile that make work easier. One of the important elements is project estimation. There's a team. Let's look at a typical situation. An HR team of 5 people working, perhaps a mixed team. There are no departments, just a couple of recruiters, a training manager, people, and an HR director, and they're working on a project. They have a set of ideas about what they want to do for onboarding, recruiting, motivation, team building, communications, automation, and so on. And they need to understand what we're taking on for the next sprint. Let's say it's for the upcoming month. In order to select tasks, they need to evaluate them somehow. Because developing a newcomer's handbook is one scope of work. Developing a first day checklist for company employees is a different scope of work. Developing a recruitment request template is a third scope of work, and choosing a company communication system is yet another. This is another set of tasks. So the team needs to somehow take on what they can handle. That's why an estimation is done. So in Agile, there's a concept called planning poker, when all tasks are scored in points and they can range from 0 to 100 conditional points, like 0, 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100. And there are special cards. These cards are sold, or you can download and print them, or print and download them. Cards are given to the entire team, and the team discusses. The team reads an idea, like developing a new feature, and estimates how many conditional time units it will take. Then they throw down their cards. Some people's cards more or less match, but someone throws down the lowest or highest card. Those who threw the lowest or highest card Discuss why someone estimated the task as very simple, while others as very complex, and they come to a common solution. That is, they revise the estimates. In the end, the estimate that was most common is chosen, so everyone agrees that it was an estimate of 3 points. And so, teams choose as many tasks as they can complete, based on a certain number of points. Then, while working on the tasks, they look at how many points they were able to complete. These points are called story points, meaning the team keeps statistics and knows over time that during a sprint they can complete 40 or 50 story points. And then, when evaluating the next set of tasks for a sprint, the team chooses exactly 40 or 45 points worth of tasks. Accordingly, only tasks that fit the team's work speed are included in the sprint backlog. Nothing extra is taken on to avoid having unfinished tasks. And there's another technique to monitor daily how many story points have already been completed. So there's a burn down chart for story points, showing when all story points are completed at the end, and there's how quickly the team is handling it, and you can track at any time whether they're keeping up or falling behind. This is one of the approaches. Next, the second, probably the most important approach, is the task board. It's called a Kanban board. In the past, it was a board on the wall with sticky notes. Some people still like to do it this way. Many have switched to systems like Trello or similar ones from Asana, or if using Jira, you can also create a Kanban board, like in Miro. At the start, all the sticky notes, all the tasks are placed on this board. And as the team works on these tasks, the sticky notes are moved around. The stages can vary. They can be like shown here, or each team can have their own. But the team sees how all the sticky notes move to the very end. So let's hear from those who are already using Agile methodology in their work. Please write whether you use a physical task board or if you use some software like Trello or similar. For those who are already using this approach, please write. My teams and I most often used Asana in one company, though it's supposed to be pronounced Asana. Maybe someone else? I've seen many HR teams who said that it's very important for them to have it physically. They would take a board and stick all these notes on it or pin them with thumbtacks. Miro, Trello, Bittrex has a similar board. Miro again. Yes, Bittrex has it too. Bress is more like a CRM, but it's not a problem to implement a similar board. Cool. Let's move on. At the end of the sprint, it's very important to conduct a sprint review to understand how the sprint went overall. During the sprint, the product owner can make some changes to the requirements and between sprints as well. The team develops changes to the product, called the product increment, and demonstrates it to the product owner. The product owner accepts the product and provides feedback. A retrospective is also very important, so that the team can discuss at the end of the sprint how they worked, what can be improved in their approach, for example, where they might have gotten distracted or gone off track. Now let's talk about what an HR product is. So I, for example, like to call an HR product absolutely everything that HR does. It's an idea, a method of information, a service object that serves the needs of employees in the business and satisfies their wants and needs. This product has certain benefits. They can be very tangible or not so much. So any document, recruitment request, vacation application, employee handbook, onboarding policy, all of these are individual products. A corporate event is a product. I know many companies that view job openings as products. That is, they treat each job opening as a product. Moving on. It's important to understand that a product has several layers. There's the core, that's what satisfies the direct need. There's the product itself, which is the set of all features, and there's the environment. For example, if we're talking about a new employee handbook, the core is informing the newcomer. The main purpose of a newcomer's handbook is to inform the newcomer. This is the core benefit, the core of the product. But there's also the design of this handbook, its placement somewhere in some format, and its connection to other resources. There's knowledge testing. This is what goes into the product. It's no longer just the core, it's the product itself with a set of features, including packaging. And there's the environment. That's what accompanies the product. How we deliver this handbook to the employee, where they store it, how they can regain access to it, and so on. Okay, let's move on. Agile HR has its own enthusiasts who have organized communities, who hold many events, and who are now writing a book that will be published soon. They've prepared a really cool, infographic. What is Agile HR? We'll go through it briefly now. Here's a link at the bottom where you'll be able to download and print it in full format. So Agile isn't just about process tools, it's also about practices, principles, values, and mindset. That is, companies that implement Agile often start with the mindset, understanding that they need to move more towards a flexible, modern format, rather than being an outdated company. At the same time, mindset and values are less visible but have a greater impact than just some principles. A company that applies the tools but doesn't strongly believe in them isn't really about flexibility, the ability to take risks, will have a harder time. Next, when we talk about HR work in Agile, we usually mean first, it's a cross-functional team that works. That is, it's HR that doesn't develop standalone products, but works jointly with different departments. It could be marketing, legal, finance. It's having a Kanban board where there's a backlog and options, for example, like this, waiting in progress done. These are stand-ups where the HR team meets in the morning and briefly discusses work on the project. This is a review, meaning assessment, retrospective, prioritization, and agreement in the work process. It's also the principle of T-shaped people. This is when a person is an expert in their industry and also has some expertise in related fields. This is what many Agile teams strive for. So this is when an HR professional who works in recruiting also learns a bit about training and, for example, compensation. Next, employee experience, an extremely cool topic in HR, because in Agile there's this concept of customer experience. And they draw a customer experience map, a customer journey map. HR professionals who implement Agile principles will be talking about this in the course. I'll show you such a map. They draw an employee experience map and analyze how an employee, as they progress through the company, what processes they encounter, what experiences they gain, and what we can improve within the Agile framework. So one of the principles of applying Agile in HR is to study the employee's experience as they move through the company, even before joining, from getting acquainted with the company, to leaving, being in the alumni club, and possibly returning. Next, it's the ability to rely on facts. This is what business has long wanted and expected from HR. This is what makes HR analytics a popular and modern topic. This is why many HR professionals go to study HR analytics. It's the ability to rely on data. And we'll dedicate our second session to this. We'll talk about how everything that HR does should be based on some kind of research and numbers. It should create value for the business, for employees, and for customers, because HR affects employees who, in turn, affect customers. HR forms hypotheses, tests them, and implements only what works. HR develops products using software development methodologies. That is, they create a prototype of a future solution, test it, collect and analyze data, get feedback, experiment, and verify. They use approaches like beta testing, which are common in product development and so on. Then the cycle continues: plan, do, check, adjust. In other words, we're constantly in a state of continuous improvement. So we didn't just launch an onboarding program and forget about it. We planned what this onboarding program would do and what value it would create. We developed it, launched it, and now we're observing whether it's producing the intended results or not. And we keep modifying it until it gives the result we need. Next, when we talk about Agile, it's a flexible approach that has replaced the inflexible approach. That other inflexible approach is called waterfall. This is when a team plans to do something, works on it for a very long time, and eventually creates something. Very often, changes in the development process are such that by the time the team has almost fully developed everything, it's no longer needed, because the requirements have changed 150 times. There was no quarantine before, now there is, and all communications need to be restructured. Therefore, unlike the classical approach where there are huge risks of things changing, Agile works in small cycles, delivering value bit by bit. And in the end, ultimately, the client, be it the company, executives, or employees, gets what they need. I know that some HR professionals, even without realizing it themselves, are working according to Agile principles. That is, they understand from their experience that developing something for a long time and tediously is inefficient and doesn't work. So they start looking at some short-term processes. These people who are already doing this, if they study the entire Agile HR approach, they will enrich their knowledge and toolkit so much that they can be even more effective at work and create even more value for the business. Furthermore, when we talk about Agile, another role of HR is implementing Agile throughout the entire organization. It is the ability to shape the organization's vision and goals, to tell the organization that we need a strategic session to create the company's strategy. We need a culture for the company to have a vision. It is the ability to train employees, experiment, and make data-driven decisions. It is the ability to build a customer-centric culture. It is understanding the different roles in Agile. And it is also understanding that for effectiveness in a company, employees must be autonomous on one hand, but aligned on the other. For example, implementing an OKR system, when the HR team does it, is another step towards Agile, but now for the entire company. Let us move on. Also about the organizational structure. Agile is also about how employees work. The classic structure is hierarchical, while the Agile structure is flexible with network structures. There are many companies that are implementing them. Spotify is one of the most interesting companies in this regard. There are many principles for scaling Agile to the company-wide level. Because when one team works, it is more or less clear. But what if a company has 10, 20, 50, or 100 teams? How to scale Agile to a company of 100 people without it falling apart? And here we start talking about principles of holacracy, sociocracy, and different methodologies. There is a methodology, there is the SAFe methodology for scaling Agile in a company, but it is also high level. In this course, we are taking a simpler approach. Furthermore, when Agile is implemented in HR professionals start to look at their work in a completely different way. They put the individual at the center. They understand that they work, first and foremost, for the individual. All the regulations, procedures, and so on are analyzed to determine how much they help or hinder people. If something doesn't help people work, it's discarded. There are many examples of companies such as Netflix, which has thrown out many traditional rules. They got rid of vacation policies. They thought, why should we control how much vacation time people take? So they implemented unlimited vacation time, letting people take time off as long as they coordinate with their managers. Why should we develop complex policies to control small expenses made by employees? We follow the principle of common sense, spending only where there's benefit and using simple reporting. Successful teams that implement Agile principles completely rethink how they work. It's a total restructuring with a different purpose. For example, in one of the companies where I worked, ID company, when I arrived, they had strict time tracking. That is, every employee, upon arriving at the office, would swipe their card and their time tracking would begin. At the end of the day, they'd leave, swipe again, ending the count. Monthly calculations were made of how much they worked, a report was sent to the manager, who would review it and either approve or not. And in the end, those who worked overtime were paid some kind of bonus. That was the principle, and people were forced to comply with this system. They thought, I came in a bit late today, so I need to make up for it tomorrow, and they'd just sit in the office doing nothing. When we realized that we're not the kind of company that charges clients for employee time, like some consulting companies do. We develop products, and it's important for us to create the final product for the client. We need to move away from time tracking. Instead, we'll implement a task management system, and we'll finally evaluate employees based on the tasks they've completed, not on how many hours they've spent in the office. These are the kinds of solutions that emerge in companies that start applying principles and begin thinking about value and results, rather than regulations, processes, and so on. Moving on, modern Agile is when we focus on our employees as individuals and continuously think about how to create value for the business. Risk managers prohibit throwing out rules. Julia, risk managers haven't made any money for companies yet in any country in the world, so their task is a bit different. It's not about prohibiting, but about reducing risks. So please send risk managers to compliance courses, to modern courses, so they don't hinder the company's ability to make money. Next, make safety a mandatory condition, experiment quickly, and gain experience. This is the modern approach. Where is Agile applicable in HR? I believe it's applicable almost everywhere. Perhaps only in some very routine operations in the personnel department. Well, it might be more difficult to apply there. In recruiting, it's a very popular approach to treat each vacancy as a product, with teams working in sprints, usually weekly sprints, and each recruiter clearly plans a specific set of actions for each vacancy for the week. How many candidates will be found, how many responses will be received, how many interviews will be conducted, how many phone calls will be made, how many tests will be given, and they do everything to make it happen. That is, the recruiter commits to taking specific actions on 5 vacancies. In training, each session can be viewed as a product. And in general, we'll look at one example of applying the Agile approach in HR across various areas today. Any development of new HR products can follow the Agile principle. Now let's talk about roles. Specifically, who is the product owner? The product owner is the person responsible for the product requirements. Unfortunately, this is often a problem, because it's difficult to find someone in the company who will make the final decision, as there can be many users, many clients, for example, all the managers in the company are the product's customers. All employees in the company are users, and there must be one person who will represent their interests. This is called the product owner. One person who is responsible for the product requirements, compiles the product backlog, and ensures its availability to all team members. Due to the specifics of applying Agile in a team, most often this person is someone at the beginning of the process. But it's great if the team is ready for it. Someone can be from the business side, one of the top managers who is willing to take on such responsibilities and work in a close-knit team. Next, characteristics of a product owner. They are visionaries of action, leaders, team players, advocates and negotiators, empowered and dedicated, accessible and qualified. These are the requirements. This product owner should work with the Agile team just like all other team members, and preferably they should sit together with the team. If it's not possible to sit together, at least they should spend 1 hour a day with the team. That's why the product owner is often either the HR director or, in companies with HR business partners, one of them. An HR business partner can act as a representative of the business. Next, working with the client. The client is the one who acquires the product, while the user is the one who uses the product. From an HR perspective, the client is most often the managers, while the users are the employees. They are the ones who determine the success or failure of a product. A product will only be in demand when enough clients buy it and users consider it a worthwhile acquisition. That's why in HR, they often talk about the so-called buy-in from the business side, about how the business, in quotes, buys HR products. At the same time, clients and users may not be the same and may have different needs. But it's true. The training needs of a manager for their employees and the needs of those employees themselves might be slightly different. Let's move on. How to work with them, engage clients and users at the earliest stage so that they become involved in product development as early as possible. Understand that, for example, a person who buys a drill doesn't need the drill itself, but the holes in the wall. In other words, understand that when developing a system for employees, HR is not developing a system, but a solution to some of the employees' tasks. When developing an onboarding program, in fact, we're not giving managers an onboarding program. We're giving them an acceleration of the process for their future employees to reach full effectiveness. Therefore, only by focusing on the needs of the buyer, that is the employee, can an optimal solution be developed. What mistakes are often made with product owners? Either it's a person who lacks authority, meaning they can say things but in the end they don't make any decisions. Or they're very overloaded, can't properly devote time to the team. Or they're a partial owner, meaning there are several owners who supposedly work together. This is very challenging. Next, there's the remote product owner, who is located away from the team, working remotely or in a different location. It's some kind of deputy product owner or some committee. This is not good. That is, ideally, choose one person who can be trusted with everything to represent interests, who will communicate with managers and employees and with the HR team to convey requirements. Let's move on to questions for choosing an owner. Who most accurately represents the clients and users in your company? By the way, it might be the chief operating officer. It's very often such a person, or the director of a retail chain, or the sales director who might be associated with the product. In other words, someone who, on one hand, is deeply involved in the business, but on the other hand, is also very much about HR. Who defines and describes customer needs and product functionality? Who leads the development of the product concept and actions for implementation? And what role does the team, teamwork, and collaborative decision-making play? Now, let's look at an example of a company that implemented the Agile HR principle in their business to solve a specific task. This is the Miro company we talked about today. They have a product for virtual teamwork using a board with various options. This is an IT company's team. They implemented an Agile approach to develop their corporate culture. What did they do? We're less interested in the description of this company here, but rather what they did. They faced a task, or more precisely, they were tasked with developing a corporate culture. They thought they would do it best if they adopted certain principles. That is, they would do an HR sprint and apply the basic principles of product development. They looked at the practices of company A here and did the same thing. So, they developed, or rather divided, the culture development stage into 4 parts. This is research, primarily research on user behavior, that is, employees. This is not the design of a minimum viable product. This is testing and bug fixing, and this is the release of the final product. So what did they do? They started engaging people, began to study their culture by conducting interviews, asking questions, surveying people, and communicating in person in order to understand their client in great detail. From a product development perspective, this is called custom. They call it customer research. This is what HR should do to ensure all HR products are effective. We'll talk more about this in the vector class. Next, they started collecting not just numbers for culture, but whole stories about what their employees say about the culture. Then they looked for a process that would suit them, found one of the processes, which was also about Agile, and applied it for brainstorming from the raw material of a certain final product. Next, they started involving people, looking for the right people who would work in a workshop format. So here they demonstrated the principle of a cross-functional team, where not just one person in HR worked on this culture, but this HR person gathered several company employees to jointly develop the product. Next, they found that something wasn't working. applied the principles of error tracking in the system, started thinking about how to find and fix errors in their culture, and applied this principle. They developed questions for testing and released the first version. They presented, such pictures, presented them to people, listened to feedback, and then started working on integration, began improving and started implementing this in all processes. They detailed what they achieved. Here are examples of what they looked at and have already implemented in all main processes. This is roughly how Agile HR can work, using one specific product as an example. For those interested in reading more about Miro's approach to product development, this would be an article. There's also an article about HR in English. There's not much information in Russian yet, specifically about Agile and HR. I mean, they write about it, but more in terms of this is what it is and general things. And here's a small case study. And of course, there's one book that's very popular overall on the Agile approach. Specifically, this one will be about Scrum. It's by Roman Pichler. A little blue book, one of the very popular ones. Homework for those already on the course. Today you learned the basic principles of applying Agile in HR. Please think about and write down 10 arguments for why Agile HR could be useful in your company, and what will the company gain from this. This is an opportunity for self-reflection, to prepare an understanding for yourself of what this will give you, what you will apply here. And again, like many other approaches and methodologies, such as Agile methodologies, it will be a little different in each individual company. For example, like the OKR methodology. It's a flexible methodology, but each company implements it in its own way, or like corporate culture. Also, in each company, it's implemented a little differently. The same thing. Yes, it's important for you to understand what it is, learn about it, experience it, and find the format of its application in your company that will provide the most benefit. What's next? Next, we'll go through the main elements. We're going to talk about planning a product concept. This is one of the most important stages. We'll analyze how a product idea is born in general, what happens to it, and how we decide that this product should be developed. We'll discuss how to work with the product backlog, how to fill it, how to prioritize, how to evaluate, how to select, and then how to implement. Then we'll talk about how to launch products in a company, how to ensure the product eventually takes root, and how to manage changes, among other things. How to conduct a meeting. An important part is having the right kind of meeting. And we'll look at the application of Agile in different areas of HR. Today we had one example, culture, and in the 6th session we'll break down different areas from recruiting to onboarding training and so on. With that, today's session is coming to an end. I'll post the presentation in the Beacon Academy Telegram chat. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If there are no questions, write down what was most valuable for you today. It's true that a book will be published. Yes, it's true. I was excited about that too. The book, just so you understand, will follow this scheme, but it will be a more detailed explanation of this scheme. Okay, I'm sharing the presentation. What you've taken away, what you see, you might be able to apply in your own company. What things you might already be interested in trying out in your company. Please write in the chat. Maybe someone decided to try a Kanban board as a first step. I know that many people start experimenting with Agile simply by creating a Kanban board for themselves. They put their ideas on it and start working with it, moving ideas around as they get completed. That's already a good start. Some people start thinking about how to avoid making a big product all at once, but instead take small steps, small parts, and launch them in the business so that the business doesn't have to wait for everything to be ready. Some are implementing cross-functional teams, finally realizing that many things in HR can't be developed by one person alone. You need to either assemble a team, even better an HR team and business representatives, conduct workshops, hold meetings, make decisions together, brainstorm together, and then you'll get really great solutions. So please think about what you're taking away from this. I'm sure that all of us are facing a future of work in companies where there will be more of this, even now. Every company is constantly applying one principle or another. Every year I see new cases of how companies are applying Agile approaches. So, if this is your very first approach to this topic today, your first introduction to the subject, I recommend you start taking an interest in it little by little, track it and implement the principles in your work so that when it becomes widespread, you'll be ready. Because today you're working in one company, tomorrow you might end up in an information technology company or a company close to information technology or simply a high-tech business. And there will be Agile methods there, and you'll already know what's what. We know the artifacts, we know the roles, we know the processes, everything is perfectly ready to work. These are the recommendations as we conclude today's session. Thank you to everyone who was online. If you're watching on Facebook, I'd appreciate a repost. If you're watching on YouTube, please give it a like. That's all for now. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.